chose that song to sing. And I'm sure any of you that have gone through life and had some trials and some joys and all, you feel God's led you the same way too. It was a dark November night, way past midnight. We were on a Pan Am 747 jetting our way to Karachi, Pakistan. And it's a long ways from here to there, so you make many stops. We had stopped in Europe for several days, several weeks. But you know, we were basically on our honeymoon. We were married in September, and this was November. And I would say I don't recommend a place for a honeymoon. Anyway, as we looked out the window and looked down at the bright lights down below, I thought, wow, that's got to be some nice city down there. We had seen pictures, and it had looked very civilized. And of course, they always show the best there is to show. You're probably not familiar with the history of that part of the world. Pakistan and India were once one country. And Eric's shaking his head, that's right. In 1947, what happened? There was partition, and it was a bloody war, and there was independence. They divided the two countries because Pakistan being mostly Muslim, they wanted their own country to do their own thing. And as we know that India is mostly Hindu, however you say it, anyway. And they don't get along, at least they didn't then. Go ahead.
Well, when we arrived at the airport, we were met by no less than a division representative. And the reason that there was a division representative was because India and Pakistan didn't get along, and it was difficult for them to get back and forth across the border. So they were to drive us to our temporary residence, which was an apartment. And on the way to that temporary residence, this division representative said to me, "I don't know why you're here. It's much cheaper for us to hire the Muslim doctors."
Why were you there, Ted?
Well, I had received a call to open a department of urology at the Karachi hospital. And it so happened that the man that had given me the call was a German man that I had known of before in the German youth when I lived in Germany. And anyway, that sort of fell apart too as I tried to set up the Department of Urology. It takes time to develop a practice in a specialty. You don't walk in and just go blazes with it. You have to develop a name. You have to let people know that you know what you're doing. And so it was rather slow. And as the days proceeded, this man from the division caused more problems and more problems and more problems. And things didn't go well in the hospital with my work either, because they had a problem with infections. Well, anyway, I continued working. Now, finally it came to a shouting match between the division man and myself.
Okay,
and
let's not get ahead of the game.
I'm sorry that I had that, because it wasn't very Christian on either one of us, our parts. But anyway, that's what happened. Well, in the meantime, I tried to do everything that I could to be human. And I rode my bicycle back and forth from our house to the hospital. And one day I decided, you know what, as a little kid, I used to ride no hands. And I bet I could ride no hands here too. And I thought it'll even be more fun if I get a newspaper and hold it up and look over the newspaper, but make it look like I'm reading it as I'm riding no hands along the and it worked. people started staring at me and wondering, what in the world? How can he do that? And it was so much fun for me. But hot, you have no idea what heat is. It was 100% humidity and rarely got down under 90 degrees. At Christmas time, though, it did get down to 72 degrees, and the people were wearing fur-lined helmets and fur-lined coats and fur-lined pants, and they were shivering, and Joan and I were wearing shorts riding our bicycle.
Yeah, well, you know, they said they were going to give us a little cottage to stay in, and to us was a small cottage. Well, we got there, and it was a brand new 3-bedroom, 3-bath, living room, dining room, kitchen, front and back lanai, and very terrazzo floors, everything, you know. So we had no furniture. That came several months later. But all the homes have walls around them, and that is to protect you and your property from all the vagrants that come by. And when I say vagrants, I don't mean 2-legged ones, I mean 4-legged ones. You've got the goats and the cows and any 4-legged thing there is. They all herd their animals through to be fed. The guest cottage that we first stayed in when we got there, I asked our hostess, what do I do with the garbage? And she says, just throw it over the wall. I said, what do you mean throw it over the wall? She says, yeah, just throw it over the wall. She says, they'll all herd their animals down the alley here and they'll pick up all the stuff, which was true. And then the last people that come and pick up what's left are the very poor people, and they're picking up plastic and paper and that kind of thing, and then they turn around and they sell it, and that's what they live on.
By the way, with all these walls that are around houses, every wall in Karachi was used as a urinal by men as they walked by.
I wanted to say more about our yard. We planted a nice garden, and running around in shorts you would never do there, but we did when it was nice and cool and in our nice little garden there. The culture is very different, as you can imagine, and it was a cultural shock for me. I had never lived outside of the United States before, and Ted had. He'd been several years in Africa. But the first time we left our guest room and we went down to the hospital, and I had a sleeveless dress on, which was probably verboten, and this beggar comes up to us.
It's forbidden in German.
Yeah. And I'm scared to death of this guy. I cling to him and I say, what should I do? And he says, don't pay any attention to him. Well, it soon becomes a way of life because the beggars are all over, because this is part of the Muslim faith, that they have to receive alms 5 times every day. I believe that's it, isn't it? Yeah. Well, another thing I need to throw in here, there was a stoplight right by the main road at the hospital, and there was this beggar there that was, well, we didn't pay any attention to him. Well, after he got to know us and who we were, he'd stop this and he'd say, hi, how are you today? So that shows you how.
And he'd roll his eyes up so all you could see was the whites of his eyes. So he looked as though he was blind and maimed because of the way he held his hand.
And we were told that we had to have a servant. And Ted says, no, we're not going to have any servant. Nobody else is going to be in my house. Well, they said, just try it, you know. It is so filthy and so dirty. And one Sabbath, I remember everything was clean and nice, and we had the windows all open because of air. We had no air conditioning. The air conditioner that we took with us soon blew out because the hospital didn't install it correctly. The only air conditioner we had was a little window air conditioner in our bedroom. But the dust was so thick, the wind and the dust and the dirt. And I soon realized, yes, I guess I need a servant. So one day there was a knock on our outside gate, this wall around the house and the gate, and he came and he says, I'm Sadiq, and he said, I've been sent here by Mr. Aykroyd, the hospital administrator, to be your servant. And he says, and I'm an Adventist, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, because Ted had said, I don't want a Muslim servant in my house. Anyway, to make a long story short, we fell in love with Sadiq. He and his wife and his young daughter moved up on our roof, servants' quarters, into one room that was up there. No toilet facilities or anything. It was someplace else. Forget that. But he was just a blessing to us. He was such a sweetheart. And every Friday, he would wash the car. Oh, that's, you know, we bought an old car. We had a choice of having Ted came home one day, he says, we can get a VW or we can get an old Mercedes. And I said, well, we better get the VW. Well, he came home the next day and he says, the VW is gone. But you know that Mercedes was a blessing to us because we would fill that every Sabbath afternoon with nurses from the nursing school. And we'd go out to branch Sabbath school in the various villages. And they'd be sitting on top of each other and hanging out the window and everything. But so it was a real blessing that we had.
There were two places that we passed as we went on these Sabbath trips. One was called Aroma Circle, and the other one was Perfume Point.
You named them that way.
We named them that way because most of the foreign missionaries, the ladies especially, put perfume in their handkerchiefs and held it up to their nose as we passed those places.
Well, every Friday, as I said, Sadiq would wash the car. And if we were gone someplace and it wasn't there when he wanted to wash the car, when we got home, he put his hands on his hips and he says, where's my car? And we laughed at him and Ted threw him the keys and he said, there it is. We knew he couldn't drive, we knew that, but it improved our relationship that he thought he knew that we trusted him and so on. So anyway, it's your turn, working in the hospital.
Well, working in the hospital was very interesting. I had a male nurse, and when a woman would come in, and they would have these burqas on, you know what they are, with their faces covered. You don't see any part of them at all, maybe their hands. And in order to examine them, I had to have a translator, which was a male nurse, a young fellow. And to examine them, I had to have them take their burqa off, which they would do. And under their burqa, they had a complete set of clothing that covered them completely. And I had to have them take that off. And under that, they had another set of clothes that you had to take off. Well, I remember one lady, I came in and I had to do surgery on her, and she did very well after surgery. And when she came in for a post-op visit, and she was completely well at that time, I told my nurse to tell the lady that she can make eyes on bus driver now as she goes home. And he said, oh no, I couldn't say that. And I said, oh, go ahead. So he finally translated it and he got slapped in the face. So I knew that was a no-no there in Karachi. Well, at any rate, it finally came to the point that we decided we would have to leave. And we started making arrangements for us to go home, started packing the things we wanted and selling the things that we didn't want to take home. So as we were doing, that was about 8 months. We came home in 9 months. But while we were doing that, we heard some stories about our assistant administrator. He had been a nurse, and he was so good at nursing that he became the assistant head nurse for the hospital. And he was well versed in business and did well with people, and he was finally hired to be the assistant administrator for the hospital. Well, there was another man who had been trained at Spicer College in India, just like Daniel had been, and this man, instead of being trained in nursing, he was trained in business administration, and he was sure that he should be the assistant administrator. And things got kind of bad between the two of them, and Daniel got roughed up several times going to or from the hospital. His wife was the head nurse in the emergency room, and the two of them were wonderful people. They had 4 children, and they were just delightful. Well, one time, Daniel was, there was a fire it was in a storeroom where they had old mattresses, or they were brand new mattresses, not used yet. And Rafiq, who was the man who thought he should be the big cheese, said that it had to be Daniel who set the fire. Well, arson in Pakistan is punished by death. And Daniel, being a Christian in a Muslim world, didn't sound very good. But at any rate, at about that time, we were, as I say, almost ready to go home. And all the expatriates, the foreign workers there, Adventist foreign workers, missionaries, were called to the head nurse's apartment. And you can tell about that.
Well, Ted called me one Monday and he says, come in at noon, we're going to have a big meeting. He says, I don't know why, but they've called us, all the missionaries, together. And the hospital administrator said, we've got a big problem. Daniel has been accused of starting a fire in the warehouse, in the storeroom where all these new mattresses are. And we know he didn't do it. And as Ted said, he'd been roughed up a lot, going back and forth from his home to the hospital. And fine person, beautiful family. Anyway, he said, Mr. Aykroyd, the hospital administrator, said, we've got to get him out of the country. So what do we do with him? Well, we'll send him up to our village, wherever that was north.
Well, one thing that Joan hasn't mentioned is that the police liked Daniel. And they had come to the hospital administrator and said, we'll give you 3 days to get him out of the country. 3 days. If you were a Pakistani business person and sent out of the country by the government to do some government work, it would take you 2 weeks to get all your papers together in order to go on official business out of the country.
So anyway, here we are trying to find where to send Daniel. Well, we'll send him up to Afghanistan. Well, no, that won't work. Well, we'll send him here. We'll send him here. Can't send him to India because he's a Pakistani. So they looked at us and they said, Ted and Joan, you're going home. You get him out of the country. And we said, well.
And we said, we don't know anything about any of that stuff.
It was so happened that several months before that, an American boy had been presented at the hospital all bloodied up in local clothes, but the blood was not his own blood. And he wasn't talking, and he was barefoot, and his feet were full of blisters and sores. And we were at church one Friday night for church, and somebody came down and they said, we've got to get this guy out of the country. And Ted was the council had said it's got to be an American that takes him out of the country, an American doctor. And he was the only American doctor there. This was Friday night. On Sunday morning, before TSA, we all went out to the airplane on these trucks that load the food onto the airplane, you know. And they took this guy out, and Ted said, I want to fly first class with him because I don't know how he's going to react. And I've missed a big point here. In the embassies all over the world, at least at that time, and I'm sure now too, they have phone books for every place in the United States. And this guy wouldn't talk, so they gave him a little sodium pentothal, and he did tell them where he lived and where his parents lived. And they called his parents and told them the story, and they said, well, you pay for a way for him to come home. And they said yes, they would. So anyway, Ted's on the airplane with this guy, still won't talk.
He wouldn't talk at all. And finally we got to, I've forgotten where the place was, the next place that we stopped.
You got to feed
But-
him first.
Yeah, well, we got to New York, and we were going to change planes, and he said, I want a hamburger. That's the first thing he said to me.
Before that, I have to interrupt because this is funny. If you know Ted, as most of us do, he's very phlegmatic. And so they bring this food to feed him to eat.
This is in first
and
class.
Ted starts feeding the guy. And he suddenly realizes, and he says to him, if you think I'm going to spend this trip feeding you, you got another guest coming. He said, if you want food, you can feed yourself. So now we're in.
And he did. But the first word that he said was in New York when we were changing planes. And since he was talking then, I thought, okay, we can go regular air. And we flew to his home in, where was it? Michigan. Anyway, we get off the plane, and they have this car, and we were going through a tunnel with this, what is a motorized cart anyway, and all of a sudden some people were coming towards us, and he says, hi Mom, hi Dad, it's good to see you. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, something's cuckoo here.
Anyway, we got the guy home, so we're back to Daniel's problem now.
Well, wait a minute, there's something else I have to say, because that was also an unexpected mission.
Oh.
And when we had dinner at his parents' home, and then they took him to a mental hospital. And the next morning I was getting ready to move on out, and the parents said, he wants to talk to you. He won't talk to anybody else in the hospital. Would you go? And I said, sure, I'll go. And he started talking. He says, can anybody forgive me? And I said, I don't care what you did, but you're still alive. And as long as you're alive, God can forgive you. All you have to do is ask him. And I said, what do you want to do with your life? And he says, I would like to become a counselor to kids that are getting mixed up in drugs. I said, that's a wonderful idea. You work on that. And that's the last time I saw him, and I haven't heard from him since. But that was an opportunity of mission that I hadn't expected.
So anyway, the consulate there knew that Ted had taken this man home, and asked him to then. I'm lost. What happened? I lost something.
Well, when we were at that meeting.
Oh, I know. We went from that meeting down to the embassy, to the consulate.
Well, we first of all at the meeting have to tell that too. When they said we had to get them out of the country, well, I knew that they were both nurses, and I said we'd have to know what's listed in their passports as to what kind of work they did, because if they had nurses in their passports, we would never get them out of the country. They wouldn't let a nurse go. And so this lady who was an American who had come as a retired overseas worker, and you happened to know the language because her husband had worked at Spicer. So she said, well, I have their passports in my purse. And we said, well, let's look at them. And lo and behold, they had listed in their purse personal service instead of nursing. And I said, I think maybe we might be able to do something with that. So we took their passports. I took them to the embassy, and I told the ambassador what the situation was. I didn't mince any words. I said he's being claimed that he has set a fire in the hospital, and we know that he didn't do it. And he and his wife and 4 children have to go to the States. Well, let me look at that. So he found out that they had already applied for passports, but it hadn't gone through yet. And he said, I have 1 visa left, and he says, I can give it to Daniel. And you'll have to wait until the next month to get his wife and 4 kids out.
But to get out of the country, you need a lot of clearances, and one is police clearance. And he said, I will waive police clearance for you. He needed an x-ray, chest x-ray. Everybody that immigrated legally needs a chest x-ray, and what they call state bank clearance, and that's to tell them how much money they're allowed to take out of the country. Well, we were really blessed. So this was on Monday noon. I made arrangements with our lady friend. When he had to have a physical examination, and there was one doctor, Muslim doctor in the hospital that was very much in favor of the hospital. So we knew he was safe, that he could give Daniel his physical. But to get an x-ray, we had to go someplace where he could get an x-ray. Well, the best place to get an x-ray is on the street.
But the reason we had to go to the street to get the x-ray was because the x-ray technician was a friend of Rafiq, who was the enemy man.
Well, talk about being scared. First of all, we don't know what we're doing. Secondly, I feel like somebody's watching me all the time. So Edna and Daniel and I get in our car and we drive, and he tells me where to go to get this street x-ray. And he gets out of the car, and I'm watching the whole time in the rear view mirror to see if anybody's around. And anyway, he comes back, he gets his x-ray. We take him home. This was still Monday. And we had, because we were leaving and we had been selling some things, we had some money. So I went to these, what they call state bank clearance, to get that cleared so that I could have enough money to buy his plane ticket home. This we did, and go ahead.
Another thing that he needed was a vaccination certificate with all the vaccinations that you were supposed to have in order to leave the country. Well, there was somebody that came forward and said, we can take care of that. Now, whether the vaccination certificate was legal and real or falsified, I didn't care. But we got one just before we were to take him to the airport. Well, the day that the night, or should I say the evening, Tuesday evening, he was to come to our house. We told him, you come to our house tomorrow evening, ready to leave. And so he got a taxi. He rode all around town, left somebody off someplace, and continued driving around till he was certain that nobody was following him, and came to our house. And we said, we fed him something and he wouldn't eat. And we put him in our bedroom and said, you lay down on the bed, because there was a fan directly over it where he could cool off a little bit. And no, he didn't want to do that. He went on the far side of the bed and lay down on the floor. Well, later on that evening, here comes some people from the hospital. There was his wife. There was her cousin, who was the head of the Protestant Christians in the whole country of Pakistan, and the hospital lawyer, who was Roman Catholic. And this Methodist man said, we have to this is a political issue. We need to not let Daniel go out of the country, because if we let him out of the country, we're not going to be able to deal with this politically. And my response to him was, you know, if the Lord opens the way for Daniel to leave the country, I would hate to be in your position to fight against God. And lo and behold, the Catholic lawyer said, I think we better pray. So we all prayed, and they left. And Daniel's wife, Violet, was the last one to leave. And we said, do you want to see Daniel? And she says, no, I don't want to know, because they're going to ask me questions, and I really don't want to know. So came to midnight, and we called the airport to find out what time the plane was leaving, because they're always late. And lo and behold, it was going to be an hour late. So we were an hour late getting to the airport. When Daniel got in the car, he got in the back seat, and he laid down on the floor. He was scared. And when we got to the airport, I said, okay, Daniel, we're at the airport. Let's go. He says, I'm scared, and he stayed on the floor. And I said, well, give me your papers. I'll do as much as I can. And I went to all the various desks that you have to go through. The only one that he had to be present for was the vaccination. So I went back to the car, and I said, okay, Daniel, there's nobody in the airport, and all you need to do now is your vaccination paper. And he said, all right. So he got it out. What he had taken with him was a small briefcase. I don't think it was any wider than about that, and maybe about that thick. And he had a clean pair of underwear in there, and that's about all he had with him. And his Bible, I think. But I don't know. That's what he told me later. So he got past, and we were going to go into the boarding room, and they wanted to prevent me. Well, I had learned you can yell at these Pakistanis, and I said, I'm his doctor, and he needs care. He needs to be watched very well before he gets on the plane. And they let me go in. So we stayed for a while to make sure there wasn't anybody in there that was going to cause problems. And I had to leave. But before we had done any of this, I told Daniel, please write a letter to the hospital administrator and tell him that you're very tired, that you want to take a couple of weeks vacation, and then you'll be back. And so I said, but put it in an envelope, but don't seal it. So I watched until the plane left, and then I came back to the hospital instead of going home, went to the administrator's office, and I put this unsealed letter from Daniel on his desk, because I knew it would start all kinds of rumors, because there's no honesty with those Pakistani workers. Well,
okay, you got Daniel on the airplane.
Yeah.
When the plane was airborne, he told us this afterwards, he started to cry. And of course the flight attendant, is something wrong? Is there something we can do? And he said, no. He said, everything's okay now. Makes me cry to think of it. So he was on his way to New York. We thought we had given him enough money to get from New York to the White Memorial in Los Angeles, and that's another story, because one of the administrators from the White Memorial had been over to do something in the hospital and to study it, and he stayed with us, so we developed a relationship with him. So Daniel was supposed to go to the White Memorial to Mr. Cooper's. Well, when he found he didn't have enough money to get to there, he called Mr. Cooper, and they go by first names only, and he says, well, this is Daniel, and Cooper says, Daniel who? So anyway, Daniel was able to get some more money to get to Los Angeles, and he went to work there. And that's another tale of the story. Now in Pakistan, in Karachi, we have 4 children and their mother there. And at the time that the embassy gave us the 1 visa to get Daniel out, we said, what about the rest of the family? And he said, I will guarantee you 5 visas for August, for next month, which he did. Well, we would have worked on getting her out of the country also, but she had friends there that wanted to do it. So we said, fine. So again, I had to go buy the ticket with the money that we had. I went to Pan Am to buy the ticket. I didn't have enough money. And they were supposed to leave that night, Tuesday night. The plane only came Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. And they were supposed to leave Tuesday night. And I came back to the hospital and I said I couldn't do it. So I got the ticket for Thursday night for all of them to leave. So the hospital administrator, Mr. Aykroyd, had to go to the hospital or to the airport that Tuesday night that Violet and the kids were supposed to leave. And he came back the next day and he told us what a blessing that Violet couldn't go. He said the airport was full of Rafiq and all of these henchmen that were against Daniel. And if they had gone out that night, they would have known.
Well, another thing that's interesting, when Joan had some problem that she needed to talk with Edna, the American woman, we used, Daniel's last name was Mall. So we decided, instead of saying Daniel and Violet, we'd just say, Joan has to go shopping. Or Edna would call and saying she had to go shopping. And we used that to know what was going on in between. When we got to the point where we were ready to leave, we had left our apartment. We were staying with some other friends for the night. And Sadiq said, I've fixed a dinner for you. And we went back to the old apartment, and he had fixed a nice dinner for us, and we ate on the floor. And I don't know where he got the dishes, but anyway, he was just so nice to us. And when we went back to our friend's house, Joan says, well, aren't you going to sleep? And I said, not in your life. I'm going to enjoy every moment leaving this place. When we left, we flew to India, and we went to the division headquarters asking if they could put us up for a day or two. Well, they didn't have anything, but they put us up in a couple of cots in the basement.
Literally cots, army cots. But it was nice to sleep.
When the division president came by to talk to us, he said, I am so happy that you're out of Pakistan. And we said, well, we're happy we're out too. And he said, if they had known what you were doing, you would have been at house arrest and you would have never gotten out. And I said, but we're American citizens. He says, in Pakistan, it doesn't work that way. He says, they didn't know what you were doing, but we did. And he said, we really appreciate it.
Okay, now to what's happened to the family. They were both RNs. They both are RNs. They came to this country, and of course they could not work as RNs because they have to take the test here. Daniel was put to work in the OR, in the recovery room, I think something like
And
this.
pre-op and recovery.
Yeah, and being as skilled as he was in nursing, he'd look at the procedures that were done and so on, and he said, they're not billing for everything they need to bill. They're losing money. So the hospital put him to work picking up all these charges. In 1 year, he saved the hospital $300,000, the White Memorial Hospital. They then put him down in the pharmacy, and they said, you do the same thing down in the pharmacy because we're losing money there. Okay, so from there, he got his RN in California and was elevated and so on, worked hard. If you people don't think that Christian education is important, let me tell you, these two people worked 3 jobs, 2 and 3 jobs, to keep their kids in Adventist schools. And today they are a testament to that.
The oldest boy is a medical doctor with an excellent practice down Riverside. The second girl is a girl. She's working on her PhD in psychology. The next in line is a teacher, teaches physics and chemistry in high school. And the last boy is something very interesting. He was 3rd in his class in medical school, but in medical school, they go out to these various clinics. And one clinic was had a lot of women of different lives than what we like. Yeah, ill repute. She claimed that he molested her. And instead of studying the case to find out the truth, they let him out of medical school, not to be able to come back for 3 years. The family borrowed as much money as they could to fight it and failed. And the boy he's really been hardened a little bit by it. He does have a degree in laboratory technician, and he's working with that now. But all of them are in church.
These kids were, the oldest was 8 years old, and the youngest was 4, I think. And when they left with their mother, Anil, the oldest, the boy, said to Ted, "Do you know where my daddy is?" And Ted said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "When you see him," he said, "will you give him a hug for me?" And you know, what this family has been through, it blows my mind. And you see them now, they have a nice house, their kids were educated, and they're working hard, and everything's fine. And a lot of the other Pakistanis around and the Indians, they say, "How come you've got so much? How come?" But God has blessed them. They have served the Lord, and God has blessed them. And why God used us, we don't know. We sure didn't know what we were doing. We were as dumb as we could be. But we're thankful that we were there at that time, and that for 3 years we were supposed to be there, and we were only there 9 months.
But you know, I was kind of puffed up thinking I was going to set up a department of urology. I don't think that's why we were called to Pakistan. I think we were called there for the work that we did with his family. And it certainly was not our doing. We can only praise God.
That's about it. We hit the highlights. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer as we can. I remember one of the Muslim doctors, lady doctors there, saying to me, "Oh, I wish I could dress like you dress," because they had to have all these clothes on, you know, and it was so hot.
Yes.
Was Rafiq an Adventist or a Muslim?
Muslim. Well, he
No,
claimed
Rafiq-
to be a Muslim. He claimed to be an Adventist.
The story about Rafiq was interesting. He had fallen in love with another nurse, other than his wife, and he wrote her letters. And the nurse's name happened to be Gertrude. So we called those letters that happened to get into the hands of the hospital administrator, we called those letters the Dirty Gertie letters. And in those letters, Rafiq had written that he would become a Muslim in name only, so that he could have a second wife. What he did that was improper was, in the Muslim world, they can have 4 wives, But the first wife is the one that chooses all the others, and his first wife was not involved. So when Rafiq's friends and family were all going to Mecca, I don't know whether he went or not, but he had claimed that he was a Muslim. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, we can meet openly with Adventists, and really the only people that we could possibly get as new Adventists would be other Christians. And the one thing that I am sorry that we hadn't done is to teach the Muslims how to become Messianic Muslims so that they can maintain their identity as Muslims but worship Jesus. Any other questions? Yes. No. No dream. No Muslim, as far as we knew, dreamt anything about. I think one reason that we Adventists were tolerated so well is because we don't eat pork, and we don't smoke, and we don't drink alcohol. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't, but it was very difficult for us, especially when they had Ramadan, because here it is so hot and so muggy, and they're not allowed to eat anything as long as the sun is up. And they get dehydrated pretty easily. And their mentality is totally different than anything I'd ever experienced before. They had a parade that was celebrating something. I don't know whether it was the end of Ramadan or why, but they march along the street, and they had Red Cross stops in various places, and these fellows would come along and they would flip these knives over their shoulders, and they'd stick in their backs, and they'd pull them up, and their backs would be bleeding. There was that, and then one day when we passed the university going from home to the hospital, there was a bunch of people there that were burning a car, violence. And one other thing that I learned about the Pakistanis, if you were talking to a Pakistani and asking questions, they would lean forward a little bit and trying to figure out what kind of an answer do you want to hear. And they would tell you what you wanted to what they thought you wanted to hear. Had nothing to do with honesty. And I said that once to Daniel, and he said, mm-hmm. So let's sing the last hymn, which is 341.
Wow, that was very interesting. So, street x-rays, forged papers, smuggling people out of the country. That's quite a tale. God-led. All right. We're learning things about Ted and Joan we didn't know. What's the number? 341. Why don't we stand together as we close with "To God Be the Glory."
Our dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the story of Daniel and Violet and the children. We thank you for the way you led, and we thank you that you lead in all of our lives in the same way, unexpected blessings and outreach to others. And we thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.